Okay, we're going to start. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to join you for this new UrbanFarm rendezvous. We have today three guests. Michael Martin from IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. Then we have Fabio De Menda, which is researchers in the Department of Agri-Food Sciences and Technologies at the University of Bologna, and Xavier Gabarel, professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona in Barcelona. Between these three guests, we also have Michael Martin, which will be in the jury for this year. And so, as usual, I would like to thank our hosts, our guests to be here, and I would like for them to make a short presentation about themselves. I remind you all that this session is being recorded, so you can watch every time on our website. And I think we will proceed in order as I presented the guests. I'm sorry again. So first presentation of Michael, then Fabio, and eventually Xavier. I will ask you please to keep representation within the 15 minutes required so we can have 5 more minutes of questions from the participants, and then we can skip to the next presentation. So please, Michael, the floor is yours now, and thank you again.
Thank you. Let's present here. Now, do you see my presenter mode?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great. So I'm going to be presenting a little bit about developing sustainable urban vertical farms and give you some insights from a life cycle based perspective, things that I work with. And my name is Michael Martin, and I'm a senior researcher at IVL, the Swedish Environmental Research Institute, and also work at KTH Stor Institute of Technology. And my background is in industrial ecology. So I work mostly with industrial symbiosis and food systems and bio-based materials. Now, I'm not sure if everyone works with, for example, vertical farming, but that's what I mostly work with in my research. And just to give some input, so vertical farming is a more condensed type of growing. So you grow in layers to increase the productive area, and typically with hydroponics. But there's other different systems, for example, aeroponics. And you can use different sizes and configurations. So there is, for example, plant factories, these really big ones, like in big warehouses. But in the urban context, there's also these modular solutions. And you might have seen like container farms and things in basements and on rooftops and different things available. And these are typically, at least in the northern climates, we use LEDs as the lighting source. And you grow without soil usually. And these are generally based primarily on producing leafy greens and herbs and salads and different things, but they can be expanded for other products. And that's important because one thing that we need to understand is that we sometimes overestimate the possibilities of these systems. And in our research, we also look at the expectations through the discourse that's used to promote these. And it's important because you've probably heard a lot about, for example, vertical farms, and that they can address all aspects of sustainability. They can provide self-sufficiency, reduce transport water consumption, large yield improvements, resource efficiency, etc. And this is really good. And there's a lot of things that are relevant, but not all of this is backed up in, for example, the scientific literature. And we sometimes don't find that information available. And it also leads often to a lot of criticism of these type of systems. So it's important to think about this when you're designing these so that you can actually address that. And that's where we can take into account life cycle based methods and address the different questions. For example, where, how, what, and who. And with that, I'm talking about, for example, where do the impacts in the systems occur when we look at these? And now I'm generally talking about environmental impacts, but it can also, you can think about social and economic costs as well. But we want to see where along the supply chain and the production do the impacts occur, or the benefits, for example. And then how can we reduce and improve these? What can we do there? So that leads to the what. So what available materials, utility systems, technologies can we use actually to like improve the system, and where can we connect things and use new materials, try to see what we can do to make it better. But also we need to think about who can support this. So we can't make that happen without people in the system, and how they can manage and get these things going. Because based on my previous slide about the discourse, there is some use and misuse of LCA or the life cycle perspective. So again, some claims might be unsubstantiated, and there can be comparative assertions, for example, with other crops and systems. So you need to think about that. You don't compare, for example, salads with wheat, because it's not really the same. Again, because there's a lot of criticism of these systems. At least we've seen that in recent years, and by sticking to the confines that you have, you can add validity and legitimacy through assessing the systems. And since it's rapidly expanding, we're getting more and more knowledge, but we need some more, because we don't know that much about sustainability. There's few available articles, but they're increasing every single year, and they tend to focus on the potential, or for example, lab scale, or things that are done at university labs, etc. And we have very few case studies where, like, from an actual production system from a company perspective. And these also have divergent scopes. So for example, while I'm in Sweden, they might be totally different than in Italy or Spain or Germany, etc. So the urban farms that we focus on primarily, in at least in my research in Sweden, is more the vertical farms, and they're typically underground. And what we see is that there's a lot of carbon assessments, but there's very few studies that tackle other indicators, like socioeconomic benefits and the economic performance of the system. And these can be important to actually support those systems, to get, for example, to get money, to sell it to the municipality and get further backing. And from an LCA perspective, there's a lot of challenges. You probably don't have to think of all of these things in your project, but I just wanted to bring some of them to mind, so you can think a little bit about it if you do an assessment. And I think all of us will be available to answer some questions. But the thing is that these are emerging, and they're always evolving systems, so that the technology constantly changes. And how you do these type of assessments is a snapshot, attributional, or is it perspective system? And how do we take into account the rapid digitalization and the data availability to improve these? But also energy demand is very important for these, for example, the vertical farms. And this is for the LEDs and ventilation. Those are two very important things for the vertical farms. But also timing, for example, when do we use the electricity, but also photo period, when do we have this on, and how does that affect the emissions? And then it's also about the function of the system. So what is the actual function of the system that you have? Is it we talk about the functional unit. Is it a plant? Is it a kilo harvested? Is it a potted plant? Do you want to look at annual production, or is it even based on nutrition or quality? And some things that are important in the life cycle assessment are also the market and distribution, but also the packaging and how it may affect the quality of the product and the waste. And again, just think about avoiding comparative assertions that it's better than this one, or because you need something to back that up. So what I also put in bold here is that I think it's important to also include other indicators. So when you do sustainability assessments, try to think of other indicators that are important to show the value for the local system that you're actually looking at. So is it going to add jobs? Is it going to add economic viability? So not only the carbon footprint, while that's important, it might not be the most important to talk about. And going back to the environmental performance, what we generally find from the research is that the energy use, of course, is the big thing to improve. And we can do this by, if, for example, in your region, you can choose a greener electricity, or even like the choice of pots, material. You can switch out the growing media and reduce transport and logistics. These are some things, but I think related to this particular case, where you're looking at urban farms and how to connect to other systems. Some things that we research on as well is the connection to urban and peri-urban infrastructure and systems. So that's one of my main research focuses, is about urban symbiosis. And it's important to think about because these systems are connected to their urban environments, and it's generally forgotten about in the assessments, or even in the companies that work with these. They typically just buy things from external companies, and then they use it and they produce the plants, and then that goes to market. But there's a lot of urban residual streams that can be used for these urban farms. And there's a lot of unused residual space, for example, under buildings or on top of buildings that can be used, which you've been given some confines in your system. But there's also lots of things that can be used, for example, for the growing, with compost, for the fertilizers. You can link to a lot of other important goods that can be produced, not only plants, but also maybe mushrooms, different things there. And it can reduce waste handling, etc. So one study that we've worked on is, for example, with a small urban farm, where we looked at using biofertilizer instead of conventional fertilizers, but also using urban residual materials like brewer spent grain, compost, and paper for the growing medium. And it has various possibilities, but we showed that it can greatly improve the environmental performance of the system. Another one that we are working on, which this is just some preliminary results, but we're looking at a vertical farm that's under a basement. And again, we're linking to the brewery and the biogas, etc. But we're also looking to the integration with the energy system of the building, because they need, there's a lot of energy required for the ventilation or the HVAC system. And that can actually be integrated a lot better with the farm. So you can use heat pumps and you can use different things there. And as you see in the figure here, the ones with the negative graph, it can greatly reduce the environmental performance because we can reduce the energy demand for the vertical farm. And we also put, for example, photovoltaics on the roof just to see what that would do. But the biggest impact reductions came from the integration with the building. And when we're working with these companies, I would say that I work with a lot of urban farms in Sweden and the Stockholm area, and most are working with, for example, circular solutions. So they're switching their growing media as one first step, but they're also taking more considerations on their nutrients, because they're finding that they get a lot of questions about it, especially when people talk about these systems. They want, for example, eco or krav or organic products. And I think some things to leave you with here is that environmental sustainability, what I'm mostly talking about here, is only one piece of the puzzle. It's good to show that because it can lift some red tape, but you need to talk about other things. And I think it might be important to see how to actually get these systems up and running in the assessments. So you need trust, you need people talking, You need actual things that can work, and you need to integrate and talk about how it can work with the people in the region, because that will ultimately lead to its success. So some conclusions for me, I would say that you can't necessarily say whether or not the system that you build is going to be sustainable from the beginning. It's a process, and it will constantly evolve. So you can start where you are, and you can think about how it can improve in the future. And these things are developing, and there's potential, so that it's really good to see. And you have two different cases, and they have totally different contexts. So I don't think they can be compared, but it's really interesting to see these, and I'm really looking forward to the solutions that are available. But if you do sustainability assessments, make sure to have some kind of transparent and sound assessments, and avoid these overemphasized benefits. But also remember to link to the urban and peri-urban systems that you're within. For example, use the materials, use the infrastructure that's available, because that'll give you a better system to link there. But also, it's really important to have fun and be creative here. And again, I'm really looking forward to this, reviewing the proposals. And finally, I would say here's some, I won't go into these, but some interesting reading and viewing material, which can help just thinking and giving some inspiration for the development and the assessments. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. In meantime, you were doing with the presentation, we decided to have all the presentations together and then questions later. So please wait for the questions. I will give the floor now to Fabio De Menna. So please start with your presentation. As usual, I remind you it's 15 minutes, then we'll go to Xavier's presentation, and finally we proceed with the questions. Please, Fabio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks, Elisa, and thanks to the others. And good morning, everyone. I will try to share my screen. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Fabio. Perfect. So, thanks again for inviting me. I'm a researcher at the Department of Agricultural and Food Sciences, as it was mentioned before. And my background is in agricultural economics. And my main topic of interest is about sustainable food systems. And I usually do carry out analysis which are into the life cycle thinking set of methodologies. So some of the things that I will be presenting are going to be rather, let's say, resounding the presentation from Michael. And some of them are going to be, let's say, a further addition to what he was mentioning about, specifically about the fact that sustainability is not, let's say, a concept which is written in stone. It's something which is more about progress. It's about continuous improvement and innovation, and it's also about integrating more than one pillar. The focus of the presentation is specifically, let's say, a thought about giving you inputs for the, let's say, development of a business plan and a business model related to your project, which is more taking into account not only the environmental impact of what you are going to propose, but also economic and social aspects of sustainability. So that's why we are discussing about these initiatives. So this is the outline of the presentation. There is a small introduction, specifically about urban agriculture and how it integrates with sustainable food systems, what and how sustainability can be measured, and some info about the 3 pillars and some conclusions. Also, I will give you some, let's say, hints and updates about the work that we are carrying out within the Foodie project, specifically about the sustainability assessment of city region food system initiatives. There are going to be some, let's say, publications and some reports that you might want to look into afterwards when developing your project. So What we start with the fact that obviously food systems are in a continuous transition. This transition, as you know, it's actually quite fast, and it's not taking a lot of time actually. So we always think about these things as some historical trends or some long-term trends, but actually in less than 100 years, and in some countries actually in just in some decades, the food systems radically changed, and they keep evolving towards an increased amount of technology, an increased personalization, and also the let's say development of very interesting phenomena. Think about, for example, printed food, or the increased use of digitization within not only the production of food but also the distribution and the relation of consumers with their own food. So this transition is obviously accompanied by the increased use of technology. And usually with the increased use of technology and also the increased amount of logistic and infrastructure, you always have some issues that you need to consider, related obviously to the amount of inputs and to the length of the supply chain, to the distance from the place of food production. So in this perspective, sustainability is emerging as a key macro trend in all the economy, but obviously also in the agriculture. As you know, there are several policies and strategies at the international level, but also simply the demands of consumers are driving obviously food system towards an increased amount of sustainability, a sustainability which is more than often communicated via labels and via marketing strategies, and maybe not so often actually accompanied by actual strategies, meaning that the two things can actually be separated and sometimes they can actually go hand in hand. The issue with the communication of sustainability, but also with the actual transition towards sustainable food system, is what Michael was mentioning and anticipating. Sustainability is a process. You are not always reaching a status where you just are satisfied with what you reached, and especially sustainability is quite complicated and it's holistic in its conceptualization. So it means that you maybe you are tackling one aspect and you are probably creating some problem or some shifting of burden over some other aspect. So this complexity is difficult to address in terms of transition and innovation. It's difficult also to measure and to communicate. This is because actually food systems are obviously having a multiple interrelation with several issues. Think about the environment. Obviously, we have the effect on climate change, but if you focus just on climate change and you just measure the CO2 equivalents of impact of a system, you are maybe disregarding or understanding to a little extent what are the impacts on other issues like water pollution, land use and deforestation, consumption of other scarce resources. So also just looking at one pillar, it is very difficult to select just one indicator or to focus just on one aspects. The same is happening actually if you are looking at the economic or social pillar. In terms of economics, for example, the agri-food sector is obviously a complex economic sector which is providing a contribution to the economic growth of countries, is obviously providing, especially for some cases, for some countries like Italy, is also providing a very great push towards a positive trade balance. And it is obviously also touching upon different categories of stakeholders, economic stakeholders. So you have several groups interested in this sector, from the producers of inputs and seeds up until consumers association. You have very different kind of interest related to agri-food sector. The same is happening with social and cultural aspects. We are all discussing about transition to sustainable and healthy diets, but the diet in itself is not actually just it doesn't have just nutritional aspect. It has a very strong cultural content. It is tied to local traditions, and by local I'm not mentioning just national, but even more than, let's say, more local than that. So also the transition to sustainable and healthy diets is not going to look like the same in every country because of that. Obviously you have health impacts, but if you are focusing just on nutrition and health impacts, maybe you are disregarding the fact that you also have the provision of jobs. So for example, if you are deciding to move away from the consumption of meat and animal-based products, maybe you are definitely doing some good from the environmental point of view or from the health perspective, but you have to deal with the fact that you are also having some job loss potentially in the animal farming sector. So again, food system sustainability, as everything related to sustainability, is very complex. This means that you need some holistic approaches in order to, let's say, be able to include every possible aspect. What about the relation between cities and sustainable food system? In the transition towards sustainable food system, urbanization is another key macro trend that we need to address, because urban areas are both major drivers of demand, and they have an influence on how the food system is actually meeting these demands, what kind of food we are producing, what kind of food delivery and food distribution we have. The typology of food consumption is definitely affected by the urbanization. And we have definitely some figures on the slides that you can see that are really pointing towards an increased focus towards this relation between urbanization and sustainable food system. So the key question is how we will provide sustainable and healthy food, and definitely urban agriculture and looking at cities as let's say, being part of city region food system is important, because its city is not isolated. It is obviously having a region behind itself, in which some food is produced, managed, distributed. You have a relation between urban and rural areas, which is connected by food. And you have a lot of, let's say, also authors that pointed towards, let's say, this perspective, this approach to the city region food system, in order to understand how to frame urbanization within the context of sustainable food systems. I can point you towards other products other than that, and we also took this perspective within Foodie and within the related sustainability assessment that we are developing. As I was mentioning, in this perspective, urban agriculture is not a new phenomenon, as you can see in the images. Victory Gardens, if I'm not wrong, from Bologna itself during the World War II. Food was always produced within and around cities, so it's definitely nothing not new, but it's new, obviously, the kind of urban agriculture that we are trying to promote in these days. Urban agriculture around the world are very varying in size, motivation, type of goals and objectives they have, the kind of actors that are included, and so you can have the educational projects, food security and community directed projects, commercial farming, etc., etc. These actually proved quite challenging when deciding how to measure the sustainability of very different initiatives within Foodie, and this is going to also be crucial in developing a business model and also addressing the related impacts, because obviously, depending on the design of the initiative that you are having in mind, you will end up with very different impacts and very different things to measure. Several authors are pointing towards the fact that urban agriculture is innovative and sustainable farming practice. Why is that? Because usually these kind of initiatives are characterized by multifunctionality. They are not delivering just one function. They are not just focusing on the food. Usually they are accompanied also by the production and or provision of also non-food products or services and non-market goods. So things which cannot be marketed, but that can provide a crucial, let's say, contribution towards the success of these initiatives, because maybe they are tied to networks of relations, and they are creating also a motivation within the consumers towards the, let's say, frequentation of these initiatives. In terms of environmental impacts, usually authors are stressing that there is a reduction of food miles and emissions related to transport, especially in comparison with local, with the normal supply chains. Usually you also are saving some resources. In some cases you are not using land, or using land in a very, let's say, efficient way. And you can also have some recycling of local resources, as also Michael was pointing out. You can also have the integration of urban agriculture within not only the architecture, but also within, let's say, the functioning of a building. So it's very interesting from this point. You also have several social impacts, from food education to the direct connection of food and increased food security of neighborhoods. So you can actually have, in some cases, urban agricultural initiatives which are contributing to the reduction of so-called food desert, or to the cultural activities and cultural life of neighborhoods with some, let's say, problems in terms of these. And you have also economic impacts, because especially when urban agriculture is providing jobs or providing commodities, you have this kind of economic outputs which are really important. It was also showed, especially during the pandemic, that actually these kind of economic impacts are also tied to the resilience of the local community to shocks. So urban agriculture and these kind of initiatives can contribute positively to the local resilience. Obviously, there are several risks and concerns, because you are cultivating food in a urban area. So there are challenges in terms of space, pollution. Obviously, it's a different environment from the rural one. The production system are very different, because you have less room. Food products that you are cultivating usually are also characterized by a different kind of characteristic, and usually you don't want to be, let's say, misunderstood as a normal food, but you also want to target maybe specific consumers, consumer sections, and you have several other environmental and economic issues. But again, the business model can be quite different from the commercial one. Sustainability is usually an integral part of this business model, and you can engage several actors. So that's why, due to this complexity, when discussing about the sustainability of urban agriculture, it is important to, first of all, take a life cycle thinking approach. As Michael was mentioning, basically this approach is addressing the overall life cycle of products and services. Is not just focusing on a single sector, but is focusing on everything that is happening from the extraction of raw material up until the end of life of a product, and is usually targeting very different environmental aspects. So it's accounting for extraction of resources, so inputs, and emissions, so outputs, that have relevance with regard to climate change, water use, land use, energy use, other resources, and other environmental media and priorities. You have several indicators and several ways of doing it. The crucial part is that, again, whenever you are assessing a product, regardless of the life cycle stage you are in, you are also accounting for everything that went into that product since the very beginning. So if you are addressing bread production or bread consumption, you need to include everything that went into that product and all the upstream impacts. And this is crucial, because if you think about comparing urban agriculture with other kind of initiatives, the fact that you are reducing transport emissions cannot be actually understood or cannot be actually measured if you're not taking this kind of perspective. Then, why usually you address this with a life cycle thinking perspective? Because the life cycle approach can give you a measure, so quantify and even certify the full impacts of products, especially if you're doing it according to specific kind of assessment methods. You can identify complex consequences of actions. You can avoid shifting impacts between, for example, different processes or stages. So maybe you are saving emission at the pipe of a product, but maybe you are increasing emissions at the initial stage of the product. And is also avoiding shifting impacts between different pillars, so trade-offs between resource efficiency or cost efficiency. So that is usually why life cycle thinking is proposed. And there are different methods. Michael discussed about the LCA, but usually, and increasingly, I would say, we are discussing about life cycle sustainability assessment. So including also the economic and the social pillar, which I will be discussing a little bit moving forward. So the environmental sustainability can be covered by the LCA. So some tips related to the project that you are going to write. I would say that in writing your project, it is important to address the question from a materiality perspective. Means look what really matters, from what really is important. If you already know a little bit about the technologies, about the way that the system you are using is going to look like, and you know that there is literature on that, well, build on that literature in order to understand what are going to be the main hotspot, positive and negative hotspot of impacts, and try to use secondary data in order to understand what is going to be the potential environmental gain. Then it is important not only to focus on direct, let's say, consumption of resources. So, for example, if you are saving or not water, or if you are using electricity or not, but it is very important to understand also that the indirect emission can be very important, meaning that even if you are maybe saving water and energy, maybe you are using an energy which is really dirty, really polluting. So in that case, indirect emission, even if you are saving energy, still it's not enough. And then the other, let's say, tip which I can give you is that some durable materials, some products that you might want to include in your project are really, they really have a longer life cycle. And so the end use of this stuff is really important to be taken into account, meaning that the final waste disposal of everything that went into the system, it is really important. Then, as far as the lifecycle costing is regarded, this is something that can be useful for the economic part of your product and for developing a business plan which is really financially suitable and sustainable. Usually, the lifecycle costing is measuring the cost in lifecycle perspective and can be applied to evaluate the financial viability, specifically to calculate the so-called net present value, and to also calculate the internal rate of return, meaning that in one case you are considering the balance between costs and benefits over, I don't know, 10 years of operation or 20 years of operation or whatever. And also by balancing costs and benefits over this lifetime of your project, you can also understand what is going to be the return rate of your initial investment, especially because in some cases, actually, these kind of projects can have a very high amount of fixed cost at the beginning, and then you want to understand in how many years you are going to recover the initial investment. And this is very important also to understand the eventual financial sustainability of for example, taking money from a bank or something like that. so how to finance the project. Some tips about this: economic sustainability cannot and should not be just about cost minimization. So also think about the larger economic perspective. Also, in terms of what is going to happen to other actors which are involved, so the potential cost and profit distribution along the supply chain, which is something really sensitive in terms of food system sustainability. Think about the so-called farm price squeeze, so the fact that farm prices are really low and farmers are usually not gaining a lot of the full added value of the supply chain. And also consider that some environmental impacts can actually be translated into costs, so they can be regarded as externalities and can be included in the financial figures as a way of compensating for eventual impacts that you might have. Then there is social sustainability, which is usually addressed by social lifecycle assessment. Social LCA is quite tricky because it is supposed to work like the LCA. So with the deterministic approach, I'm emitting a substance, I'm causing this impact. This is not always the case with the social LCA. Many social issues are not easy to quantify. In this case, I would say that this is really, let's say, a useful tool if you want to identify what are the key stakeholders of your project in terms of social aspects, how eventually the project is going to affect them positively or negatively, and eventually also identify what are the potential indicators for that. So the final tip, in my point of view, so another reading that I might suggest is that you are building maybe your business model and your value proposition, not only looking at the usual business model canvas, but maybe you want to address these sustainability issues from both the impact point of view, but also from the business modeling point of view. So I suggest you this interesting reading about the triple layer business model canvas, which can provide you very, very good tips. As I was mentioning at the beginning, and then I will close the presentation, as long as the impact of city region food system initiatives, including urban agriculture, is regarded, we are going to publish very soon a report both on a methodology for measuring this, and this methodology can provide you several ideas as indicators, so measuring some KPIs for these initiatives, and we are also going to provide shortly an analysis of 100 initiatives, so an application of this framework to several initiatives in Europe. And I would say that, but Francesco Orsini can confirm it, that we are going to circulate these products among the UrbanFarm participants in order to let you know when they are available. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Fabio. Thank you very much for your presentation, which was very insightful. I will ask now Professor Xavier to, yes, I can see you now, to share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I try to answer or to help to answer the question how to design a sustainable urban agriculture project. So this is the objective, and I think this is complementary of the previous work presented by Michel and Fabio. So food production in cities could help improve biodiversity losses and vegetative complexity, but also can help improve food supply, health, employment, recreation, spirituality. So this is a point that can help the food production in cities. There are aspects that has been mentioned before: living quality, self-sufficiency, resiliency of cities create new opportunities for the urban metabolism, management of resources, and so on. So there are several aspects that food production can help to improve cities' quality. So when we analyze cities, we can see that we need resources, so water demand, for example, heat cooling demand, food demand, that is one of the main important for us, renewable energy systems, but at the same time, we have infrastructures, households, buildings, urban forms, urban ecology. We should consider mobility, emissions, and waste. So these are different aspects to be considered when we analyze the sustainability in cities. For me, the more relevant aspects can be included in 4 points. One is the study of the urban metabolisms, the food and energy water nexus, underutilized spaces, but the most important one is people. So in the center of our study, when we start a new project, we should put the people and consider that at the end, in cities we have people, and when we talk about urban agriculture, we are talking about people. And this will be my purpose for this presentation. So in the city, there are different kind of subsystems. So some of them has been mentioned before. Green roof, open air farming, rooftop greenhouses. So I see that there are subsystems for food and biodiversity, subsystems for energy subsystems, active or passive. You can consider photovoltaic panels, or in the passive side, green roof. We have in buildings solar thermal panels, as a passive measure ventilated roof, active wind energy, aerothermal, but other passive measures can be white painted roof. Other subsystems that we can consider, the rainwater harvesting subsystems, and also the nutrients, as in the first presentation has been introduced. So we can reduce water, we can use rainwater, and also the sun, because when we think about plants, we need sun, we need radiation, or if not, this radiation must be provided with externally by LEDs, for example. And we cannot forget the legal aspects, the shape, structural issues, access, and material. So all of this, there are points to be studied. In our case, for today, the approach that I want to present here is based on our roof mosaic approach. The roof mosaic approach has been proposed for rooftop, but the methodology can be applied for any kind of urban agriculture subsystem, any kind of urban agriculture system production. And if you can see here in this slide, the proposal of the roof mosaic is the joint use of multifunctional rooftop that creates collective benefits to provide local food, energy, and water as an alternative to centralized networks. There is the point. So, as I said, I want to strengthen engaging stakeholders. When we propose the roof mosaic approach, there are 3 main questions, but as I said, these 3 main questions can be answered also in any one of urban agriculture subsystems. What are the environmental and socio-economic impacts and the benefits of the implementation of your project? Question 2, to what extent does this new urban nexus system contribute to a future self-sufficiency, city, urban area, neighborhood, building, or others? And the third question, what is the social perception and acceptance of this new urban nexus system project? For this, I want to focus in this last point. When we analyze the social functionalities of urban agriculture, we can see different social functionalities. We can see this as an open socioeconomic, that this urban agriculture provide open socioeconomic opportunities for business or for the labor market. Also, new opportunities or help to generate well-being, considering physiological and mental health. So this is points to be considered also. Urban agriculture can help or can empower people, can help to solve conflicts or improve the conflict resolutions. Or other social functionality of the urban agriculture can be educate about healthy ecosystems, about sustainable farming, nutrition, diet too. Also, we can see opportunities related with the social functionalities in the food supply for low-income groups. So there is different social functionalities that we can consider when we start a project. The next slides come from the work that we have done in the group project. So in this group project, we contribute in guidelines that you can check in the web page, and that guidelines include a chapter about the social aspects. The social aspects we consider in the different steps or phases that we have when we build a new urban agriculture project. So from the definition of the project, when we are planning, when in the phase that we build the project, and during all the exploitation. So depending the phase or the step that we are, we propose to consider some other aspects, for example, in this case, that include health and safety impacts. So health and safety impacts indicators that consider diet, well-being, physiological health, and physiological health too. The perceived access to fruit and vegetables motivates people to grow vegetables at home, and due to this, an increased vegetable consumption and healthy diets. So in the center of this view, there are the people. Healthy diets, better consumption. So as I said, we propose we use this as a checklist, and we propose a survey that contains questions about the amount of physical activity and anticipated changes of movement habits if a rooftop greenhouse is nearby, or, as I said, that can be applied to any urban agriculture system. Also, we consider consumption and activity patterns like food choice, organic, regional, seasonal, small scale, diet as a stress coping mechanism, cooking behavior, that is important, food purchase location, average daily movements. So here this is an example of the checklist or survey that we are using. As I said, there are questions that can be applied when we are defining the project, other questions that we can do or we can analyze when we build the project or during the exploitation. This is the examples of questions that I mentioned before. How often are you cooking, preparing your food yourself? Or when I go shopping, I usually go buy food, bike, public, car, others. Then, or after this, from these questions, we can analyze our change in behavior and also that's the answers could be considered when we analyze the environmental impacts, not only the social impacts. We are interested in analyze not on also the potential change of vegetable purchase location. So, as you can see here, there are sections that are suitable for all selected stakeholders during all the rooftop greenhouse implementation stages, or not, and others than not. In the guidelines or in the survey that we have, the first two sections also can be used in a pre-post analysis to examine the change over time. So we know that maybe we spend 1 year or 2 years for planning and build the project, and but then the exploitation phase is for a long time, 20, 40 years, so we at least. So the survey can be used pre or post analysis in order to compare the changes over time. And this is an example when we consider stress and relaxation, degree of mood and emotion throughout the last 30 days or after the exposure, general perception. Here you can see questions about tension, worried, bothered. So there are aspects that sometimes we forget when we plan a new urban agriculture system that we think that should be considered because they are providing also an extra value. I am finishing yet. And this is the last point, sense of community, perception of activities in the neighborhood, involvement in association, participation in the neighborhood, feeling of integration in the community, participation in the community activities. And this is how do you see in the survey. And I'm finishing. So we can also ask about feeling, about perception, and participation. So the last point to be considered also working conditions, work regularly. So which conditions have the workers that regularly exposed to the project tend to have a more profound insight of the social circumstance than customers or visitors. So here also we put examples of different points that can be considered related with the working conditions. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank all the guests that presented today. I think the presentations were extremely interesting and very full of contents for the students. Now we have a short time for a couple of questions. So if you want to make questions, please raise your hand on the app here on Teams and ask your question to our presenters. Francesco?
Well, thanks to the three speakers for these very interesting presentations. And I was wondering, looking at the results you presented and also how you emphasized the need for having multiple elements under the balance. And this is a question for the three of you, if you can just provide a brief response. In your experience, did you see that the reduced impact associated with transport and storage as compared to traditional systems was ever able to outweigh the reduced productivity that is normally found in urban farming systems? And if this happened, what were the main technologies or solutions that enable to improve the performances of urban farming systems. I think.
Yeah. Xavier, please, if you can stop sharing the screen so we can see the faces of the people who will answer. Thank you very much.
I don't know if I should answer first or. Yeah, I haven't seen too much that the transport can basically shift and that it negates the reduction in production so far. It usually isn't such a big aspect in the urban farming systems I've seen, compared to, for example, like long supply chains from others. So, because I haven't seen too many comparisons, and that's what I talk about. You shouldn't make so many comparative assertions when it's not the same product that you compare as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, the point was that if we need to have a sort of comparative assessment. So, well, I know, for instance, in Xavier's group there was some effort on understanding how tomato production could. And yeah, I'll let Xavier comment on this. But yeah, I know there are different systems, there are different products, but if we want to improve the performances of the system, probably we do have to accept some compromise in the comparison. Is it correct?
So can I add, from my point of view, transport is, depending the indicator that we analyze, one of the most contributor to, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, or one of the most, general speaking. And this happens too when we consider the food systems. Always, this is general speaking, because always we can find products or situations that there are exceptions. But if we analyze the food chain, this is not only when we produce the crop. Also, we have transport for production, manufacturing, and also until the crop or the food arrive at home. So usually, and generally speaking, it's the last mile, the last kilometer, but that happens also with food, but also with all or any kind of product, the most contributing. So when we have a city region system, this is on a short system, no? When we compare with the long distance that food from Chile to Barcelona, for example, that we import products. So the city regional food system is closer, is in a small system, and usually distance and transport are shorter. But anyway, as I think was Fabio, is per se the urban agriculture sustainable? Not. It depends how do you do it. And we must demonstrate it. So one thing is, generally speaking, that we can provide numbers and figures that is true. But anyway, we must, in all the cases, put in practice the better technology or the best available technology and methodology. If not, can be worse. And the same for the, so in food we are talking about, so I talk about diet. So as we know that people or some groups of people are changing the behavior and move to another kind of diets. If this change is done in a sustainable way, that will be excellent. But per se, a vegan, it's not always better than a non-vegan. And I think that methodologies or assessment simplify it. We need to help population, to help the citizens with labels that provide easily and a message. This is and this kind of labels maybe should be developed in the future. There are a lot, but sometimes we don't understand as a citizen. And this is what I think. So one thing is general speaking, and another we must to demonstrate always, not always, but for specific cases.
Yeah, if I can add also another issue, Francesco, you're raising a very important point in terms of comparability. It's crucial, obviously, because otherwise it's very difficult to understand if you are within the benchmark or if you are competing even with the best in class, because I don't think that producing food within cities is going to be the only solution to our problems. It's going to be part of the solution. And in order for that to be part of the solution, it is really important also to understand that maybe the point of urban agriculture is not just about yield. It's not just about producing the maximum amount that you can that you can produce, or being competitive with traditional agriculture. Because I think that in most cases, if the yield is the confronting point, then you are probably going to fall short. The point is about, yeah, as we were mentioning, about the multiple goals that urban agriculture can have, and also about probably building a different model or promoting a different model. So it is since you are already starting to, let's say, design a model in another place than what is conventionally thought as the traditional place for food production, you are already saving some miles, which can be good depending on if you are just measuring the amount of kilometers that the food is traveling, but other inputs could actually travel a lot in order to reach the cities as well. But again, it's probably about also not just producing food, but also solving other issues. As I was mentioning, contributing, for example, to the reduction of food desert, reanimating neighborhoods with socio-cultural activities, creating networks, social networks. I think that in this perspective, I think that there is the chance, and it should be like this, for urban agriculture to be an entirely different system, not just producing food in a different setting.
Thank you. Thank you for the speakers. We have time for one more question. If is there anyone from the public we want to ask a question to our speakers, please raise your hand. No? Okay, I might have one more question then to all the three speakers. So we talked a lot about sustainability and life cycle assessment. As some of you know, probably I'm an architect, and I'm interested in knowing how food production can actually work with architecture intended as new developments and renovation of the urban environment to propose better ways to live sustainable in our cities. So is there a way that these systems of food production and the integration in buildings that Michael was talking about in this first presentation could actually implement the way cities are built and planned? So what you think about that? What could be the role of architects and planners in this sustainable development of cities and in the LCA approach that you proposed?
I think that this is a transversal work that we need to do together. So not only architects, so architects, agronomists, economists, environmentalists, experts needs to work all together with the same purpose. So in a building, for me, this is an interrelation between the energy subsystems with the water subsystems and the food subsystems, because for food we need energy and water, for water we need energy, and for energy can be used from water, and also the waste from food can be used to produce energy. So with the idea of sustainability or the self-sufficiency, neighborhoods, building or cities, we should integrate all the perspective, also the social one. So architects now, or I think in my opinion, that cannot build building one neighborhood without the other expertise. As we know that we can, as the engineer or the agronomist, cannot do ourselves. This is the new approach for the future, in the new neighborhoods, working all together, because if we put in our rooftop an urban garden, that affects also the energy system, but we can reduce the energy that we spend in our flats. And this is for me, all these aspects are interrelated.
Yeah, if I can also add another thing, it's the fact that those who are in charge, as Javier was mentioning, those who are maybe in charge of measuring the impacts should be put in a dialogue with all the people involved in developing the project from a technical perspective, because both can benefit from either, let's say, end of the spectrum. Meaning that maybe the architect can provide a solution which is maybe smart to be used, or smart in terms of use and beautiful to see, or whatever, and the sustainability expert can actually provide a tool for measuring that, and so giving a value, putting a value to that, which can be in turn useful for the commercial development of the project. Because going also back to somehow the previous question, if yield is not the only goal, but also providing other kind of services can be a goal, then you want to probably also try to integrate them into the value proposition and extract value from them in some way, not only the economical way, but also another kind of way.
Okay, thank you. So the one very last question. So do you think that also the aesthetical value, for example, of a building or a greenhouse or a vertical farm, could be an important tool to communicate these new technologies and this new way to produce in cities? So maybe some suggestions about that for the students of the UrbanFarm Student Challenge.
Yeah, I do think that can be part of the challenge. So the integration, especially the architectonic integration of urban agriculture, is reputed to be one of the, let's say, most important benefits, because it's providing beauty to the city, and also it's potentially, especially when you are recovering buildings which had a very, I don't know, industrial-oriented utilization before. Using even cultivated green, let's say, in order to embellish them is very important for the restoration of a neighborhood. And in this perspective, it is there are studies which are suggesting that this kind of interventions are always leading, or somehow leading also, to an improvement in the value of land and buildings in the surrounding areas, which can be good and bad at the same time, meaning that can lead to gentrification in some cases, but it can also push a little bit even the income generation of the area. So if you have a lot of property owners in the area, which are maybe popular property owners or property owners from the low to middle income class, that could be a good way of improving their economic situation by raising their land value and property value. But again, there are good and bad aspects, and they can be valued. Definitely, there is usually an impact on real estate.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Francesco, for your question. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Xavier, for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. Well, we'll see you to the next rendezvous. Should be next Monday. And thank you again. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.